In one's body, there is mind and matter, Rupa and Nama, Nama and Rupa. And these don't occur without a cause. They occur due to causes. And in this occurring due to causes, it is not due to irrelevant causes. Relevant causes lead to relevant effects. The cause and the effects fit each other exactly. And people who want to know these as they are, what is really there in the whole body, they're just causal dhammas, causes and effects, just these two. And if people want to know them as they are, then one needs to study them, observe them as they occur with the method of satipatthana. First of all, one's sila needs to be complete. And keeping sila, the second thing is that one needs to make one's mind pure. And when the mind is clean enough, knowledge that does not involve analysis or thinking or reflection will arise. So this is the knowledge that arises in practice is not analysis, is not thinking or reflecting. It is because these types of knowledge are not able to know ultimate reality or paramata. They can only know what is called the shade of what is really there, paramattacaya. They can only know the shade of what is really there, not true nature itself. What these can know is concept or paññatti in Pali. These are just names, paññatti or concept. Mind and matter, nama and rupa, are occurring together. And first of all, one needs to study this from the standpoint of the text, the Buddhist text, the Abhidhamma, to know the theory. One needs to know this. And after having learned the theoretical basis, then one needs to bring this into one's being. One needs to realize this on a practical level. Not the way many people do in some parts of the world, using instruments to know about the mind and body. The method is, first of all, to keep the precepts, the moral precepts, and second, to make the mind clean and pure. And one has to observe the arising objects in one's body steadfastly. One does this again and again to make the mind collected. And when this observing mind occurs one after another, as though it's one mind lining up after another, then one has reached the point where one can start to see reality. And one sees how one is able to see the nature of mind and matter and to see how they are related as cause and effect. And this is not done through deliberately thinking about it or reflecting on it, because reflection and thinking cannot know true nature. About 150 years ago, science started to really flourish in the world. And there was a German scientist named Paul Darky. And he specialized in the area of electricity. And he also studied the Abhidhamma, and he practiced meditation and practiced to a satisfactory level. He combined what he knew about science, about electricity, with what he understood from his practice and the Abhidhamma. And Sayadaw knows about this through one of his teachers. This man, Paul Darkey, wrote a book called Abhidhamma Essays. And in this he wrote about how mind and matter occur together, but in terms of how he compared what is found in the practice with an example from what he understood from science. The book that this man, Paul Darkey, wrote was something Sayadawji's teachers explained to him. And so through what his teachers said, Sayadawji understood that because electricity flows into a light bulb, then the light goes on. And the bulb itself cannot produce light. But when it's connected with an electrical wire, this also is not enough for the light to go on. The switch also has to be pressed to cause the electricity to flow through the wire and into the bulb so that the light goes on. So, also, when you have, for example, how should I say? Sayadaw said it's not just a matter of there being a dynamo present or wires or bulbs, but the causes for the light to go on all have to be present. And when the causes all come together, then the light goes on. And if you look at the parts individually, they just have different functions. They're just parts that have some individual function. So one by one, if we look at them individually, we can see that there's not a being in there, not a jiva atta. But when they are combined, work can be done. And when they're not combined, when they're just separate, then nothing will happen. So an engine can't run just on its own. A dynamo can't just operate on its own. But when they're combined and connected with electrical wires and the electricity flows, then these things can move and work can be done. So this man was an electrical engineer, and therefore he used what he understood about engineering as a way of explaining mind and matter. And he also practiced. And from reading what he wrote about mind and matter in terms of engineering, electrical engineering, it's obvious from looking at his books that he understood the Dhamma. So the respective mind and matter, Rupa, Nama and Rupa, they occur together at the same time, not in a series. And, for example, if you take what happens in the moment of hearing, the elements involved in that occur all at the same time. So, we can't experience anything when these elements are separate. For example, when there's just the ear, but the sound is not striking it. Or when there's sound but the ear doesn't hear. Or, although there's sound and the ear, sound striking the ear and the ear, there also needs to be attention paid to the sound. The arrowhead of the mind, so to speak, manasikara, has to be aimed at the sound. Otherwise, we won't pay any attention to it. So these are things like hearing and so on. What we experience are Dhammas which occur when all the causes are combined. And in terms of the engineering example, when there's a dynamo and an engine, these two individual parts aren't enough to produce motion and then light. In between these two, there has to be something also. And the parts in a machine can't be too tight or too loose. They have to be just right. And also the switch has to be turned on so that the electricity will flow. So when the switch is turned on, then the dynamo turns because electricity comes through the wires, and because of the action of the dynamo, then the light can go on. And Sayadaw felt that this is very much like the base, the striker, and the spark in our experience. So when the electricity flows, it's not just due to the presence of the engine. It's not just due to the presence of the dynamo. The two have to be connected, and they have to rotate enough for there to be enough energy to finally accumulate and then flow through the wire and cause the light to go on. Before there's not enough energy, the light won't light up. So when these are all working together, then the electrical energy that is produced becomes amazingly strong. And just like this, in hearing, the ear separately can't bring about hearing when it's just by itself. The sound also, just by itself, doesn't cause hearing. The sound strikes the ear, and then there's the mental spark. The mind is like the electricity flowing. So what is the ear element, the base element of the ear? Is it a being? Is it a man, a woman, a soul, or what people call Atma? And also the sound waves. Is the sound wave a being, a man or a woman, a soul? No, it's just the striker element. So we need to understand that these are just elements. So the receptor element is the ear, and the sound wave is the striker. But even so, just the sound striking the ear also is not enough. In between these two, there has to be a connection. The mind has to be connected with the object, and this is done through the quality of manasikara, attention. So what is this quality of attention? Manasikara. Is it a being? Is it a man or a woman? Or a soul? It's just a mental Dhamma that makes a connection. And when that happens, then there's hearing consciousness. And due to the meeting of the mind and the object on the ear, there's contact. If the sound is a pleasant sound, then there will be a good feeling. If the sound is not one that's good to hear, there will be an unpleasant feeling. So these are very obvious. And hearing consciousness, or contact, or feeling involved in hearing, none of these are a being, a man or woman, or a soul. These are just true nature. And due to causes, these come together in the moment of hearing. If we want to know then about how these occur, when hearing arises, We have to observe it as a whole. We don't just try to note part, like note ear, or striker, or sound. We have to note the whole thing. So we note it as hearing. And this way that the Buddha taught is the easy way. At the moment of hearing, there's the ear, and there's the sound, which are matter, or Rupa. The ear is called the base element, or receptor element, and the sound is called the striker element. Well, element means it's something, each of these elements, they all have their own nature. They have their individual nature. The ear has the capacity, the ear base has the capacity to receive sound. And the sound wave strikes the ear. When sound strikes the ear, then hearing consciousness arises. Like when we strike a match on a matchbox, a spark arises. Where does this spark come from? Some people say the spark comes from the match head, but that can't be, because if we just keep the match head and don't strike the box with it, or strike another surface with it, then there won't be a spark. So people who want a fire, they take a match and strike it on the box. And both the match head and the matchbox, they have to have their surface that is involved in the spark being created, as well as human effort is also needed. So where does the spark come from? Where does the fire come from? Does it come from the box? Does it come from the match head? Or does it come from the human effort involved? It comes from all these causes being combined. And people who understand this understand that in the moment of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, mind and matter are like this, like these causes that come together. And to know them, then one must observe when seeing happens, when hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, when there's rising, when there's falling, sitting, bending, stretching, lifting, moving, placing. We have to study, observe all these things. And at the start, whenever we observe, we need to apply effort to observe the object, so that laziness won't enter the mind. And aiming is also important. With aiming, the mind won't retract. It won't become contracted. Aiming is the opposite of laziness. So this is very important. The two factors of effort and aiming are very important for starting yogis. One can't be sluggish or slow, and one also can't just treat it as though one is reciting a lesson. One has to develop energy out of nothing. The energy wasn't there before we started the practice. So we have to develop this energy in us. And it can't be done by reflecting. If one reflects, there won't be any difference in one's practice, whether one takes 1 week or 2 weeks or more. If one always applies ardent effort and accurate aiming, then later what happens is the quality of sati becomes strong. Sati protects the mind defends it, closes it off from defilements, and makes it secure. This sati which has this quality arises automatically. We don't need to make anything, we don't need to make it happen. If we apply aiming and effort accurately, then this sati will arise. Just while we are observing, it arises as we apply aim and effort. And then the mind will fall collectively on the object. It won't run anywhere. And the samadhi will become good. Concentration will become good. And then, because the aim is also accurate, one will come to know true nature when one observes the object. One instance of samadhi does not have much energy in itself. But if something that has energy occurs again and again and again, continuously, then that becomes very strong. So, Sayadaw will speak about how one comes to know true nature tomorrow. But the most important thing for the yogis is not to think about anything, but as soon as the object arises, to apply effort and try to aim accurately as soon as the object arises. Some yogis have been here for 3 weeks, and they're not able yet to observe properly. Knowing true nature is even farther away. So if nothing has happened yet in the practice, and one continues in the same way, then it's not going to improve. The situation will not get any better. So if one is here, one should consider that being here is to gain the peace and happiness of the Dhamma. And when we come here, we give up the pleasures of our daily life. We give up sense pleasures. So what's the point if we've lost the pleasures we have of our home life and we also don't get the pleasures of the Dhamma? There's no sense in this. So one's life should be meaningful. What one does should be meaningful. And in order to make what you do meaningful and to get benefit, Sayadaw urges all of you and hopes all of you will be able to try. That's all for today. Sadhu, 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 sadhu.